Good evening, everybody. Hello, everybody in the room. Hey, folks online. People online, can you hear me okay? Excellent. Well, tonight I'm going to be giving a talk on anger, working with anger. This is an important topic. It's also sort of a funny topic. It can be a little bit awkward. People have a lot of mixed feelings about anger in general. So for some, the sense of anger is very true, and it feels kind of embarrassing because here I am living in Minnesota. We don't get angry. And likewise, I'm a practicing Buddhist, so likewise, I don't get angry. But anybody who's been alive for a few minutes knows that anger comes up. And, some people don't really feel much of a connection to anger. I know a number of individuals who just like, it really doesn't resonate. I understand this experience. And I know others who live with a fair amount of anger. So tonight's talk is going to be about anger and working with anger. Working with anger. So we can live a life that feels a little bit more full, a little bit more rich, a little bit more room for choice. I came across this quote while I was preparing for this talk, and it reads, "A good teaching is the kind of teaching that you can apply directly to your life so that you can transform your suffering." The source of this is from Thich Hanh. He has a whole book on anger. And I really like this quote. A good teaching is something you can apply directly to your life. So I hope that in talking about this tonight, that there's something that you can apply directly to your life to help relieve your own suffering. And hopefully in doing so, relieve the suffering of those around you as well. Several years ago, I was on the porch, and I think it may have even been a Tuesday night or maybe a Wednesday evening sitting. And Jiryu, who I see is somewhere, oh, there he is, Jiryu. He and I were having one of those half conversations that you have at MZMC before you go do the next thing. And we were talking about retreat, and he shrugged his shoulders and talked and said, "Yeah, in retreat, everything comes up," and then kind of laughed and then walked away. And I thought this was really nice. It actually stuck with me, lived with me, still lives with me. Do you remember saying that, Jiryu? You do? That's great. So maybe it was maybe a direct teaching, I'm not sure. Intentional, he shrugs. I thought this is really good. As we sit either in retreat, we face our life, everything comes up. And some people hear that and think, oh, maybe this is a real sense of fear of like, there's stuff down there, wherever down there is, that I don't really want to face. I really don't want to come up. Or maybe it's something terrible or awful. It's going to be really, really challenging. I don't want everything to come up. That sounds really challenging. And some people hear everything comes up and they think that's sort of a relief. It would be nice to have things come up so that I don't feel so constricted. I don't feel so bound. I don't feel so captured by little experiences or this subtle sense of affliction sort of stewing through these feelings. So whatever your relationship is to this sort of everything comes up, everything coming up can be a good thing. We sit in this tradition in Shikantaza, objectless meditation, sitting, letting our experience be internal, external. That's really allowing everything to come up. And whatever needs to surface will surface. And in this tradition, this practice, we're learning how to relate to our experience in a beautiful way. In a way that's beautiful. So when something comes up, it might be incredible, it might be wonderful, it might change your life. We can relate to it beautifully. And when something comes up, it's really difficult. Something comes up that we wish we hadn't seen. We can relate to that in a beautiful way. My experience in doing this practice over the years has been that things coming up is actually not a problem. Things coming up is a relief. That's good news. Things come up. These are things that were already there. Come up, see them, integrate them, be with them. Not just challenging things. It's wonderful things. Be with them. Let them change us. So of those things, anger will come up. It will come up. Pema Chodron, a Tibetan nun who practices in the lineage of Chogyam Trungpa, has this really beautiful quote about the nature of anger in our lives. She says, "It causes so much damage to us. Your temper erupts violently and you are either verbally or physically abusive. It shocks our system so deeply. It shatters a lot of goodwill. It can take a long time to come back to where you were. The single blast of anger shatters the good you have done." So I think this is a really helpful starting point. Just recognizing anger is a really destructive quality. And not only that, we'll get to that, but kind of knowing this sense, and it's so pervasive too. Just a couple shows on Netflix or Hulu, a couple reels, this sort of subtle sense, this pervasive sense, either very overt anger, subdued anger, it's everywhere. Even like people who are supposed to be leading us in political arenas, in business arenas. Sometimes this anger is championed as a quality of strength. And it can be really damaging. So anger can come from a number of places. I think it's important to remember that anger can arise from socioeconomic circumstances, gender inequality, patriarchy in general, the circumstances under which we live our lives, trauma, mental illness. So there can be a lot of reasons for anger to arise. Things not going our way can also be simple. And there's many degrees of anger, subtle to pronounced. Irritation, resentment, bitterness, frustration, anger, rage, wrathfulness, and even more subdued states, perhaps tones of it within depressive episodes, a sense of withdrawing, avoiding, or even a subtle self-directed sense of contempt. So I say these things just because people's relationship to anger is very different, and I think it's helpful just to provide some framing of just there's a whole spectrum and variety of experience with how anger can show up in our lives. And we all have a sense of the destructive nature of anger, but we need not make anger an enemy. In fact, anger can be very helpful. It can be very. And I think that I just want to linger there for a second because we are in a spiritual tradition and we have these huge aspirations to open the heart to be more magnanimous, generous, loving, caring. And so there can be a real sense of like when anger arises that even though we have this understanding, nothing that arises is good or bad. We can really have this internalized sense that actually this is bad. This doesn't belong. So if you feel that, you're not alone. So we need not make it into an enemy. And this one is from Sharon Salzberg. And I really love this because I feel like it balances out the previous quote from Pema Chodron. She says, if we look at the force of anger, we can, in fact, discover many positive aspects to it. Anger is not a passive, complacent state. It has incredible energy. Anger can impel us to let go of ways we may be inappropriately defined by the needs of others. It can teach us to say no. In this way, it also serves our integrity. It is a way to set boundaries and to challenge injustice at every level. So that's like a really lovely paradox. Both that anger can be incredibly destructive and cause a lot of harm, and it can be incredibly generative. So it's really important to keep both of these in mind. And we'll talk about some strategies for working with Buddhism after we kind of get ahead of myself. Working with anger, once we talk about how anger fits into Buddhism. Where exactly does that show up? So we can get in trouble in our practice when we split our experience into good and bad. Yesterday's sit, that was good. Today's sit, not so good. Yesterday, I was really doing well dealing with my anger. Breathe through it. I could respond in a way that was not defensive. And today, I'm kind of falling apart. So not splitting that into good or bad. And when we split it into good and bad, which we inevitably will, trying to refrain from turning that into good and bad. So anger, when met wisely, can be a real teacher. Anger, when met wisely, can be a real teacher. It can teach us about our lives, with attention, about what our true motivations are. So I think it can be helpful just to take a moment to reflect. And sometimes I choose topics that are like a little heavy duty. So I really hope that it's not just like, oh, this is such a bummer. You know, it's truly, this practice can transform our hearts in a huge way through difficulty, through these heavy topics. It really changes. So reflecting a little bit on anger in our lives, just considering like, when does it arise? Are there places or situations? Are there topics that arouse great anger? How does it arise? Does it arise as a clenching in the body? Does it arise as very compelling stories? Maybe not even much of a connection to the body? Is anger for you more akin to anxiety or disorganization? Is there a tendency to enhance anger, to indulge it, to seek it out from others when something outrageous happens to us at work? You won't believe this. Good, you're mad too. Good. Is there a tendency to deny anger? This is something that many spiritual practitioners claim to not have access to. I also think it's really important to think about anger kind of in a more broad way. So I've talked to a lot of people who are like, I don't really have access to anger. I don't get that. It doesn't resonate with me. But if you can feel your irritation, maybe those moments of bitterness, getting your grocery line taken from you, when you are just approaching, you have two things and somebody pulls up with a giant cart, that anger counts too. And all of it matters. And sometimes, you know, when we reflect in this way, there could be a real temptation to kind of create a new identity out of our anger. I am angry when XYZ happens. I'm always angry when. I'm never angry. So it's not to establish a new identity, but to really understand these tendencies as a way to open us up. I remember when I first started practicing here, I had a meeting with one of the teachers, and I was talking about some patterns that were coming up for me in my practice that were challenging. And this teacher looked at me and said, well, I like to look at it in two ways: tendency and aspiration. Tendency and aspiration. So he was sort of seeing the way in which I was getting caught by sort of these patterns that were arising in my life. And then reminding of aspiration. What is that we're inclining ourselves toward? A more open heart, a softer body, easier breathing, more joy, space. What is it inclining? What are we inclining ourselves toward? So we see these tendencies arise, remembering also there's aspiration to sort of steer us. So grounding anger within Buddhism, I've given a talk on this in the past. We can find anger right in the center of Buddhism in the three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion. And these three tendencies are considered to be the thing that perpetuates suffering, keeps suffering in motion: greed, hatred, and delusion. And so greed is this tendency to want to hang on to things, to accumulate things, to get more of, to enhance, etc. Hatred is this tendency to push away, not want, resist. And then delusion is to either not notice, not care, not understand, that kind of a valence. And so right in these three is hatred, this aversive tendency. And part of the reason why we sit is because we can get really subtle with our experience. Sometimes we sit, we're like, this is far from subtle. This is fairly loud. So we can notice this tendency to want to hang on to, this tendency to push away, this tendency to not want to notice what's arising in our experience. So this is kind of the root of anger, this not wanting tendency. And so like a good example of this is you're sitting in meditation. It doesn't even have to be meditation. Maybe you're like, I'm going to go for a mindful walk. You start going for a mindful walk and you start thinking about what you're going to make for food when you get back to your house. I think I'm gonna have a chocolate bar, I have some apples in the fridge. I know I got some peanut butter too, so I'll probably combine those three and then we'll see where that takes me. Or maybe it's actually like, where did I park? So I can, yeah, because then I can get to Lunds and Barley's. Yeah, they close at 10. Get some Ben and Jerry's. It's on sale last time. I wonder if it'll be on sale this time. I'll get two. So when we're sitting, we're taking this, imagine that, very much grounded in reality mindful walk that I'm talking about. We notice this tendency of, I shouldn't be thinking about that. No. I shouldn't be having this. What I should be doing is paying attention to the leaves. I should be grateful. And if this, not that, for folks at home, kind of pushing my hands. And it's tendency, no, I shouldn't have that. So that's that seed of hatred. So that's some grounding of where anger fits in our this is at a real subtle level. And then in terms of moving on now, working with anger. How do we work with anger? How do we work with anger? How do we do that? So here, for the purpose of this talk, I've kind of split it up into understanding and transforming. Understanding and transforming. So it can be really helpful to begin with an understanding of the nature of anger. Some of this I've taken from other Buddhist teachers, some of this is from my own experience. So none of this is meant to be official, but I think we'll understand it. So the nature of anger, when it arises, it's kind of addictive. And sometimes it can be kind of intoxicating too. Anger is a really interesting emotion, right? It is very convincing in its storyline. Pema says the following. This is a longer quote, but it's really nice. So she's giving an example of this kind of addictive or intoxicating quality. So someone criticizes you. They criticize your work or your appearance or your child. In moments like that, what is it you feel? The Tibetan word for this is shengpa. It is usually translated as attachment, but a more descriptive translation might be hooked. When shengpa hooks us, we're likely to get stuck. At the subtlest level, we feel a tightening, a tensing, a sense of closing down. That's the hooked quality. That tight feeling has the power to hook us into self-denigration, blame, anger, jealousy, and other emotions, which lead to words and actions that end up poisoning us. And she continues, yet we don't stop, because we're in the habit of associating whatever we're doing with relief from our own discomfort. This is the Shengpa syndrome. Shengpa is usually involuntary, and it gets right to the root of why we suffer. The momentum behind the urge is so strong that we never pull out of the habitual pattern of turning to poison for comfort. Something triggers an old pattern we'd rather not feel, and we tighten up and hook into criticizing or complaining. And she goes on talking about Shengpa. It's not a term that we use in Zen, but I think it's a really great term. I think we know that tendency, that feeling, like being hooked by, carried away by, hooked into. Anger is of the nature to convince you of its storyline, which I've touched on. Oftentimes when anger arises, there can be a rush to deny or fix the anger. No, I'm not angry. Or just go right away into trying to transform it through maybe bringing something else in or distraction. And sometimes that can be helpful too. So, use your own experience to determine what's best. Sometimes it's situational in that maybe it's just been like a really challenging week of deadline after deadline, thing after thing, feeling a little worn down. Anger can result. Or maybe it's something a little bit deeper, and it was seeds that were sown earlier in life. Something that I've been thinking about as I've been preparing this talk and practice in general is, it seems to me, and I'd be very open to somebody who knows something more about this, but it seems to me that the seed in greed, hatred, and delusion seems to be the same, regardless of how pronounced anger gets. It seems to be kind of the same seed. That's sort of scary to think about. But I also think it's humbling too. Sometimes anger has the tendency to have a directionality to it. Sometimes it's outward projected. That person, can't believe them. That place, that situation. And sometimes the directionality can be inward pointed to. Some people who don't have a lot of experience with feeling angry at others may be more available to them as this feeling of sort of a self-directed anger. Here's another nice one from Thich Hanh. If your house is on fire, the most urgent thing to do is to go back and try to put out the fire, not to run after the person you believe to be the arsonist. I'll read that one again, just because it's really nice. If your house is on fire, the most urgent thing to do is go back and try to put out the fire, not to run after the person you believe to be the arsonist. Okay, so we talked a little bit about just the nature of anger, just kind of the ways that it seems to show up sort of in a universal-ish way. So now I want to talk a little bit about transforming. Hopefully there'll be some useful strategies in here. And I want to begin with, in the Zen tradition, when someone chooses to become initiated, they sow a rakusu, or someone becomes ordained, they go through a precept ceremony in which they take vows to live an ethical life, to live a beautiful life, take these vows. And the 9th of the 10th grave precepts is, I vow not to harbor ill will, but to cultivate loving kindness. Vow not to harbor ill will, but to cultivate loving kindness. So I mentioned it earlier, this tendency, aspiration, this vowing over and over and over again to transform hatred in our lives, to transform the suffering in our lives. You can take that up. We don't just do it once. So this is a part of our tradition. In the Dhammapada, this is a line that I think I probably used 3 times across the talks that I've given. But this is in the opening chapter of the Dhammapada, which are very early teachings given by the Buddha. And the Buddha says, animosity does not eradicate animosity. Only by loving kindness is animosity dissolved. This law is ancient and eternal. Animosity does not eradicate animosity. Only by loving kindness is animosity dissolved. This law is ancient and eternal. Thich Nhat says again, so the practice has 2 phases. The first phase is embracing and recognizing, my dear anger, I know you are there. I am taking good care of you. The second phase is to look deeply into the nature of your anger to see how it has come about. I'm going to read that again. So the practice has 2 phases, and I think that's on your program too. So the practice has 2 phases. The first phase is embracing and recognizing, my dear anger, I know you are there. I am taking good care of you. The second phase is to look deeply into the nature of your anger to see how it has come about. So working with anger in our practice, beginning with honesty and kindness. I heard this years ago, but I think it's pretty good. Kind of finding a balance between truthfulness and nonviolence. Meaning that, in Buddhism, we practice in the middle way. We swing too far into nonviolence. Sometimes the tendency can be to make ourselves small or to neglect our own needs. And sometimes when we swing too far into the sense of truthfulness, it can be a little harsh. So that can be really helpful relating to our own experience. This balance between being truthful and nonviolent. Recently, I told my teacher, I was like, yeah, I got a lot of anger coming up in my practice. He goes, that's something to welcome. Didn't miss a beat. That's a thing. Thich Nhat again. According to the Buddha and according to our experience, anything embraced by the energy of mindfulness will undergo a transformation. Undergo a transformation. And I know sometimes there's a real sense of urgency to transform our life. And that transformation happens on its own. I think it's important to remember. Sometimes we put in the work to restrain, deep transformation really happens on its all by itself. Paying attention to the experience we're having in a soft, gentle, kind-hearted way. That over and over and over again transforms the experience. Which is nice. Nice in the sense of we can relax a little bit. To not have to be the one transforming it. Can make our practice a little bit softer. Meeting, planting seeds. Meeting, planting seeds. So when working with anger, remembering that the mind and the body are not two, moving into the body, exploring, where is this anger showing up for me? Where? How? On a moment-to-moment basis. Is it showing up as a constriction on the left side of the chest, or is it a diaphragm? Do I feel it kind of above my head? Is breath difficult to access? So paying attention to it in this kind of way. Where is it? And as Thich Nhat says, embracing it. I love this kind of language, embracing. That really is helpful for me. This kind of tender, caretaking, nurturing quality. And I think the reason why I like it is, my own tendency is to be very firm with my experience. Something comes up, very good, time to go. So embracing is a good reminder, like how to do something that isn't my habit pattern. Embrace this. How do I nourish this? How do I take care of this? How do I bring this in? Not enhance. Not create something artificial, but be soft with. And in this kind of way, anger can work on us. Rather than us acting out. It can work on us. And it might reveal something. It might reveal a boundary that needs to be set. It might reveal a value. It might reveal something that needs attention. And sometimes it might be very mild. Sometimes in our practice, it's like, oh yeah, I'm just kind of getting a little carried away here for sport. And all I need is just like a little shift. And sometimes it's a little deeper. Sometimes it's a little bit more pervasive. Keep meeting it, keep meeting it, keep meeting it. You don't have to go looking for it. If it's not there, we need to create angry situations so that we can work on this project. But when it's there, meeting it. So using the body, using the breath, and staying close to it. So when we sit, that's a really nice laboratory to experiment with. You sit there. Nobody's asking you to do anything. The stakes are pretty low. So we sit, it can be really easy to work with anger and be close to anger if and when it arises. And then likewise in our lives, maybe we're in a situation that has happened a number of times before, it comes really quick. We can use our body to find where it is. Maybe it's the whole body. And using this sense of embracing, holding close, and remaining in contact with. When we do this, a little less captured by the energy momentum of anger. Breathe into it. Stay close to it, that we really know what to do. It's time to take a break. It's time to return later. Maybe now is the time to say something. Maybe later's the time. Two more strategies that can be really helpful with working with anger is using the breath. You know, we can use phrases. Thich recommends this a lot. Breathing in calm, breathing out ease, really exaggerating the breath, filling the whole body can be helpful. Bringing ourselves back. And that's not even exclusive to anger, that can just be helpful in general. Using the breath. Breathing in, meeting the experience. Breathing out, calm. Breathing out, recalling the vow. Nhat. To indulge my anger. And when I do, vowing to start over. And then compassion and loving kindness can be very, very helpful. Very, very helpful in transforming anger. Bringing in this quality of care, gentleness, warmth, of compassion. I think it's really helpful to start with yourself. Sometimes when there's a person or a situation that arouses a lot of anger, sometimes there can be a tendency to want to bring kindness to that situation, to that other person. But a lot of times it's us who are in most need of help in that moment. Okay, I think I'll end on this story and then we can open it up. So this is a story about it's an old Japanese story. It's about a belligerent samurai who goes to a monk asking about the nature of heaven and hell. Are people familiar with this story? It's a fun one. Okay, I see a hand. So this samurai goes up to a monk, says, "Tell me about the nature of heaven and hell." Kind of demanding, kind of arrogant. And this monk or teacher turns towards him and immediately starts chastising. "You idiot, you moron. You want to know about the nature of heaven and hell? How stupid can you be? You're pathetic. This is not worth my time." And the samurai, in a fit of rage, draws his sword, holds it up. His arm is back, preparing to cut the monk, put the teacher down. And the teacher says, "That's hell." And understanding immediately, the samurai drops to his knees and weeps. And the teacher says, and that's heaven. It's a good one. Okay, I think I'll leave it at that. We can open it up for comments, your own exploration of anger, questions, if that feels right. Go ahead.
Thank you, Evan, for that talk. So I just started reading the Thich Hanh's book, Lotus in the Sea of Fire.
Okay.
This is his first book that he wrote about Vietnam War.
Mm.
And I think there was some helpful things in that book for me, but I grew up bullied, and I was told, turn the other cheek, which to me, I don't think is really the middle way. And do you have any recommendations or techniques for how to deal with a situation like that?
Yeah, that's a hard one. That's a really hard one. So a lot of times this is very common habit pattern. Anger comes up, and we've been taught or told through culture to shut down when anger arises, not do anything, to turn the other cheek. This can be very gendered too. To just turn the other way, just let the other person be mad, be bigger by being smaller. This is a very common thing. It can be hard to unlearn, but it's possible. And I'm sure there's some people in the room who have some experience of this too. So the quote I shared in the beginning of the talk about Sharon Salzberg, anger having this positive quality, helping us orient towards our values, having this positive quality of helping us set boundaries. So I would say in those situations, finding the no, that's not welcome. No, don't want that. Don't accept that. Seeing if you can find the no. And in those situations, having a tremendous amount of kindness for yourself. And understanding. Yeah, it's a big question. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
Sounds like boundaries are pretty important in that case.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you hear something?
Sure.
I was also bullied and made to feel like I was less than small, emotional, the religious kind of abuse. And so what really helped me to see from another perspective was to know that it was not personal, that I was like amazing, and that some people bully others because you are the most powerful and important person, and so they somehow want to like get you down to get more power for themselves. So what if you can see your child itself from that point of view and really acknowledge for yourself and ask questions like, what was my policy? What was my problem? And not take it personally.
Thank you.
Thank you.